Well, I'm the type of guy who never settles down. Pretty girls are, you know that I'm around. Kiss them and I love them, 'cause to me they're all the same. I hug them and I squeeze them, they don't even know my name. I'm the wanderer, yeah, I'm the wanderer. I roam around and round and round and round.
Hello and welcome to Choice Conversations. I'm your host, Chris Stefanik. So as some of you may know, a while back I did a parenting podcast with Kevin Geary called Reboot Your Kids. Now, that podcast, we ended up discontinuing it as Kevin just ran out of time. He didn't have the time to keep recording the episodes. They were interview formats, and they ran from like an hour to an hour and a half. And with the work he's putting into his other podcast and the Rebooted Body service that he runs and that he makes his living off of that, he just didn't have the time to have a podcast of that nature. Having said that, he has since started a new parenting podcast that is a much shorter format. He is, because he's so passionate about parenting, this new podcast, the Powerful Parenting Podcast, he is going to answer listener questions, just taking one question per podcast, maybe a 10 or 15 minute podcast where he helps the listeners to work through their issues. So I encourage you to check out the Powerful Parenting Podcast. Really good stuff. In the meantime, I've decided that I am going to put the Reboot Your Kids podcast into the Choice Conversations feed as part of this switching from the Reboot Your Kids podcast to the Powerful Parenting podcast. The old podcasts were taken down on the Reboot Your Kids website, so you cannot get them there any longer. And I thought just for posterity's sake, it would be great to have them available so that they could help other parents going forward. So with that in mind, I'm just going to put them into the Choice Conversations feed over the next few weeks. And if you haven't listened to them, enjoy them. If you have already listened to them in the past, feel free to skip them or give them a second listen. But I just thought I'd give you a heads up on why you're now seeing Reboot Your Kids. All right, well, I hope you enjoy them. Take care.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Reboot Your Kids podcast, the intersection of real food, peaceful parenting, alternative education, and a healthy lifestyle for kids. I've got my co-host Chris on the line, along with Judy Pardo, a psychologist who's been in private practice for over 20 years. And she's also an authorized parent effectiveness training instructor. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, parent effectiveness training. We're going to talk about concepts like the behavior window, active and passive listening, using iMessages for healthier communication, no-lose conflict resolution, and how power and influence are negatively correlated. We're going to talk about all this so that you can lead your children more peacefully and authentically. Now, I do have one announcement. Very cool. My short book, Without a Fight, The 5 Pillars of Ending the Struggle for Power and Leading Children Authentically, has now been released on the Amazon platform. I've priced it at $2.99 so everybody can get their hands on it. This book really lays out the foundational principles of authentic parenting and makes the case for why authoritarianism, coercion, and passivity should be rejected. You can get the book at rebootyourkids.com. Just click on book in the navigation. Or you can go to Amazon and just type in Without a Fight in the search, and it should pop right up for you. If you are interested in continuing to listen to the Reboot Your Kids podcast and engage on the blog and in the Facebook group, that is really the pillar or the foundation of where you should start. So grab that book, again, on Amazon. It's called Without a Fight. All right, like I said, I have Chris and Judy on the line. Judy, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, and we will dive right in.
Okay. I'm a psychotherapist in private practice in Manhattan, and I am also an authorized parent effectiveness training instructor, and I have been giving workshops and working individually with people on parenting for about 25 years now.
You know, I've mentioned it several times in my podcast, and of course I've had you on Choice Conversations, but I'm now wanting to introduce the listeners of Reboot Your Kids to parent effectiveness training, why don't you just give a quick synopsis of what parent effectiveness training is?
Okay. Parent effectiveness training was the brainchild of Thomas Gordon, who was actually nominated 2 times for the Nobel Peace Prize for his work in communications, and in particular parent effectiveness training. It's a whole system of communication where you learn kind of what to say depending on the situation, depending on what's going on. So it's very hands-on. It's not, there's theory, but it's very practical in terms of teaching skills and techniques to use in almost every situation you encounter with your kids and with everybody in your life. So you start out with sort of a schemata to look through, how you look at the people in your life and how you consider them. And depending on what's going on, you're going to use a different skill or technique. So, I mean, that's a very bare bones nutshell. I can go into more depth if you'd like, or maybe we can, do that in a more casual way.
Sure. Well, I think what might be a good way to break into this is if you started off with the behavior window. From there, we can kind of, once you figure out which window the situation resides in, what are some of the strategies from there. So, but I've personally, this is something, and I don't know that I've necessarily seen this in anybody else's work. It's certainly not described in the manner that Thomas Gordon did.
Right. I think that's true.
Yeah, and it's just so helpful and was really, a real game changer for me as a parent. So I guess why don't you start with that, and then I can give some of my anecdotes. So. Okay.
And both of you, feel free to cut me off, break in, ask a question anytime. I tend to go on, so jump right in. Let me first start by saying that the whole idea, the whole concept behind parent effectiveness training or effectiveness training, the whole system of communication, is based on open and honest communication and democratic families and the right for everyone in the family to get their basic needs met. Another key point, I think, is that children are considered equal, the same as adults, only lacking in experience and usually in height. But other than that, the same thoughts, feelings, desires, needs as adults. So it's really based on mutual respect. So I just want to put that out there. The system itself starts out by saying we look at everybody through a window, right? We're always looking at people in our life, and we're judging, which I know is not politically correct. We're not supposed to judge, but of course we're judging all the time. And I think it's innocent. We like it, we don't like it, we're neutral, and that's kind of how we see the world. I don't have a problem with that. PET doesn't have a problem with that. As you observe people's behaviors and you decide what you like and what you don't like, again, we have the concept of what you were saying, that behavior window, or think of it like a rectangle, and we divide it up. So we put in, let's say, 2 horizontal lines, so now we have 3 spaces. At the top, we're going to say situations where the other person or the child has a problem. In the middle, we're calling that the no problem area. And at the bottom, we're saying the other person, or in this situation, the parent has a problem, right? Maybe the child's behavior is interfering with the needs of the parent. Sort of an adjunct to this window, we have when both people have a problem, and then we need problem solving. And when the problem is not a conflict of needs, but a conflict of values. And then there's another skill set, how to best influence someone else's value. So if you go back to the sort of have that visualization in your mind of this window you're looking through, when the child has a problem, we want to not solve the problem for the child, but help the child solve their own problem. And the skill set that we teach is both active and passive listening. So that's when the child has a problem. In the middle, where we have a no problem area, it's fertile ground for increasing that no problem area with statements about yourself, your likes and dislikes, who you are, letting the other person know about you so they can better relate to you. You can give messages, preventive messages, so that you're troubleshooting and you can let people know, this is happening tomorrow, or we need to go in 5 minutes, so that you're easing transitions. And then there's Thomas Gordon's alternative to praise, which is the positive I message, where instead of just giving sort of a blanket praise, you're letting the person know specifically why you like whatever it is they've done. I also have my, I call it PET Plus, I put my own editorial comments. The no problem area is a wonderful place to tell stories to impart your values, right? So you're not lecturing, but you're modeling and you're talking about different things where you can educate and demonstrate and impart your value system. The bottom of the rectangle now is when the parent has a conflict with the child's behavior. So what the child is doing is interfering with the parents getting their needs met, whether they're writing on the wall, which is definitely an interference, or they're kicking something, or they're playing ball in the house, which isn't a good thing. It's something that has a concrete, tangible effect on the parent. And then the tool or technique you're going to use in that situation is called a confrontive I message, where you're going to describe the behavior, say how you feel about it, and the concrete, tangible effect on you. So when I see you drawing with marker all over the walls, it's very upsetting because now I'm going to have to get the painter in to fix that, and that's going to cost me money. So what you hope for, the ideal is when you're giving this confrontive I message, is that if the other person hears that, you're not asking them or telling them to do anything. You're just expressing yourself. Very often, if they can easily accommodate you, they will, and that's it, right? I had a personal situation with my son, where we're having dinner, and he kept tilting his chair, so the front legs are off the ground, and and right. I said, in the pre-PET, it was like, please don't tilt your chair. You're going to fall. I'm not going to fall. Don't tilt your chair. Okay. Post-PET, I said, I get really worried that you're going to fall when you tilt your chair and that I'm going to have to take you over to the ER. And I get a response of, I'm not going to fall. To which I said, I understand that you're not going to fall, but I'm really worried about it, and I can't enjoy my meal because I keep picturing you on the floor. That was it. He stopped tilting his chair, never happened again. So that clear, direct communication, I'm talking about myself, how I feel, and how his behavior is interfering with my needs. I mean, this was an ideal situation, right? But that was the end. In another situation, maybe the person needs to continue that behavior. Well, then we need to problem solve. Because if they need to do it and it's interfering with me, then we go into problem solving mode, which is another skill set. And then finally, if it's a values conflict, I just don't like the fact that you want to pierce yourself, or you want to have green hair, or you want to wear these clothes, or you believe in this and I don't, then there's a different skill set that you're going to bring to bear in that situation to have the most influence, as well as be extremely respectful of the other person. I've given you a whirlwind nutshell there.
Just to jump in real quick, I don't know if you remember, Chris, but I think in the very first episode we recorded, I used that exact anecdote about my daughter standing up in the high chair and using the same line of messaging of just conveying what I was feeling, and then her making the decision to sit down based on that. And I think that's an important dot for people to connect is I think in the back of parents' minds, they believe that communicating in that way to a child isn't going to get any sort of meaningful result, that children have to be ordered to do something rather than just communicated with as you would communicate with another adult. And it truly is amazing what children will do when they are trusted, with the same respect. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, I remember that example. I listened to that podcast and I really liked it. If we would think of children more, of treating them the way we treat adults, it would really make a huge difference, because we wouldn't say these kinds of things to adults. We wouldn't use force. We wouldn't, make them do something. I think I read recently how when you're using that kind of authoritative stance, it's for the parents. It's because the parents are afraid that if they don't do that, they're not going to get, things are not going to go well. Whereas if you use a more respectful and communicative stance, you're going to get cooperation. Not every time, but there are ways to deal with that. There's another point that came up in your podcast, which I'm reminded of now, when someone was saying, so there's a lot of talking here. Like, it takes time, right? And it reminds me of one workshop I had with a man who said, like, I don't have the time. I can't spend 5 minutes explaining all of these things to my kids. I don't have that time. And I said to him, oh, hold on a minute. You just told me you spent 15 minutes arguing.
Right.
And we all laughed because we know that's what happens. It's like, but it's changing your mindset. So those 5 minutes are going to prevent those 15-minute segments that probably happen every day.
Yeah.
So it's another approach, because I have to say that people commented to me when I would use this technique with my son, how, wow, you talk to him a lot. And I would say that's true, but we rarely, if ever, fight, because there's no need, because we're discussing things.
Right. I think parents are more comfortable with the authoritarian model, and they don't see it as, like, you make the distinction between talking to them for 15 minutes versus arguing with them for 15 minutes. I think the parent is still more comfortable with the arguing because they have the ace card of, I'm bigger and stronger, and if it comes down to it, I will just force my way, right? So if they are afraid, I believe, of adopting the respect approach because they don't know what the outcome, they're not assured that the outcome will be in their favor, right? So they would rather just maintain the authoritarian approach, have the argument, and then put their foot down at the very end of it, rather than give the child the respect and the opportunity to perhaps, negotiate.
I think you're very right. And I think that, unfortunately, not a lot of people have this model. Like, not a lot of people have observed this. Certainly not a lot of parents have been parented in this way. So that it is a leap of faith to know that you can do this and you'll get better results, because you're not going to have all of that, you're not going to have those altercations and those bad feelings. And another thing that came up in the podcast, your podcast, which I think is great and is something that I always start out with, is in everything that we talk about when we're talking about dealing with our children, I think of an umbrella over all of it. And that umbrella is the relationship. Mm-hmm. So you have the chance for a lifelong, really positive relationship with your kids. And that, to me, is the most important thing. And that's what I want to keep in mind. So a lot of times parents will say to me, well, but I can do this and it works. I just tell them what to do. And I tell them, if you don't do this, this is going to happen. And I threaten them and it works. And I'm saying, well, a lot of things will work. There's no question. A lot of different ways will work. But let's look down the road, right? So the best case scenario is you have open and honest and respectful communication and a lovely relationship for life. The worst case is they hit legal age and they can't wait to be out of there and not really want to have much to do with you. Because who would want to have much to do with someone who's constantly ordering them around and threatening them? So again, keeping that foremost in your mind, the way you would with an adult relationship, hopefully, I think is key.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I just, sorry, Chris, I'll let you jump in a second. I just, wanted to also point out that, and I just wrote an article on selfishness. A lot of parents try to diagnose this concept of selfishness in their kids, or they're worried that their kids are going to be selfish. And I did some research looking for how the quote-unquote mainstream determines selfishness in children, and I got this long checklist. It was probably like a 50-point checklist. But one of the main things is, always wanting your way. And it's very funny how that's the exact approach parents take in parenting, is they always want their way. The parent always wants their way, not the child's way. And if you don't want your child to be selfishness, you probably shouldn't model selfishness. So that is probably one of the key points to connect, is like, if the parent always gets their way, that's what the child is going to be modeled, and that's what the child is going to want in their own lives as well. So the negotiation aspect has to be put in there.
I think that's an excellent point. I mean, I've boiled it down to, if somebody asks you to do something and tells you that you're selfish when you don't want to do what they want, well, what does that make them?
Right. Right.
And so to me, I don't have a problem. And I think what you're saying points to the fact I don't have a problem with everyone wanting what they want. Why not? I don't think that's selfish. Just because you want what you want doesn't make you a selfish person. Now, whether you're going to get it or not, that's something else.
Right.
But I think we all have our wants and needs. So labeling it selfish is just going to put you in the wrong mindset. So I really like what you're saying, that you're modeling exactly the opposite of what you want, and you're modeling a way of getting that, which is also not the way you want to be in the world with anyone at any age.
Absolutely. Go for it, Chris.
Yeah, well, just to piggyback on that, the umbrella of the relationship, you do have to ask yourself, what is the most important thing right now? Is the relationship more important, or is it they pick their coat up off the floor? Is that more important?
Good point.
And if you're willing to damage the relationship through ordering them, maybe criticizing them, belittling them, or whatever, instead of treating them with respect, if you're what you're saying is, you picking up your coat, your obedience to, my desires is more important than the relationship, and they're going to get that message loud and clear, and it's going to lead to, like you had said, well, why would I want to continue to have a relationship with somebody who they don't even really value the relationship with me? And they value these things that are trivial more than they do our relationship.
I think that it's an excellent point. It brings me back to, I think, where I have a lot of compassion for parents. They don't know other ways, and when they're introduced to other ways, it seems a little scary because it's giving up control. And parents have usually been parented themselves with control, right? With these same authoritative and more controlling and demanding ways. So it's not easy to sort of have that leap of faith and know there is a way, it does work, and it's so much better. And it's ultimately, even though it's takes time to learn, like learning anything new, but ultimately it makes life so much easier. I can't even begin to tell you, so much easier. Where I've had people and people who approach the people I've taught the skills to, who'll say, how do you deal with this situation when you get into this argument? And they'll say, well, we don't get into those arguments. Well, what do you mean you don't get into those arguments? Everybody does. Well, yeah, most people do battle over things and make it a power struggle. But when you give that up, you don't have the arguments. I'm not saying you don't have conflict, but you have a way of addressing it that doesn't turn into antagonistic back and forth.
This also brings us back to the time issue where you were saying parents, and I hear the same things, I don't have time to have these discussions because we would have them every 5 minutes of the day. And something that Chris just said brought this up in the coat example. I think we also used a coat example in an earlier episode of, should we force our children to put a coat on before they go outside when it's cold?
That's right.
When they're not wanting to. And the time issue really comes into play when parents are insistent on control at every level of every decision-making process, where we're really arguing over trivial issues here. If if the child says, I don't want to put the coat on and it's cold outside, we can allow them, rather than fighting over this trivial issue, they're not going to die, right? We can allow them to experience being cold without a coat, and that's actually a learning situation for them that affects them. Now the parent says, oh, but that's actually going to affect me because then I have to deal with the whining about being cold, right? Well, in my eyes, you signed up to be a parent, right? That's part of the process of parenting. That, yes, that is a situation that's going to be created. But again, we don't have to argue over these trivial issues. Children have to learn through experience a lot of times. They have to be allowed to make a decision, especially when it's not life-threatening, to make a mistake. We know it's going to be a mistake, but they have to be allowed to make that mistake, and we have to give them the room and the patience to do that.
I agree. If it's not something that's life-threatening, I like the idea of letting the child decide. I want to say for all the parents out there right now, think of homework, think about letting it be, let it be the child's decision how things go, because this is the time of year when homework really comes up. But I had a wonderful example of that with a woman who had a 5-year-old daughter. This is last year when it was freezing out, and her daughter just wanted to wear like a sweater, right? And she was about to dig in her heels, the mother, but then she remembered, okay, let me see. And she said to her, listen, I just want to let you know it's very cold out. And she brought her over to the window and said, stick your hand out the window. Child, okay, I only want to wear my sweater. The mother said, okay. She went to school. She came home. She said, I was so cold. And the mom, I thought was great, didn't say, you see, I told you. No, she just said, okay, well, you might want to remember that tomorrow. Okay, next day she says, I'm also, because she was wearing shorts, I'm going to wear my long pants and the sweater. And the mom knew, kind of, well, she's still going to be cold, but okay. The other thing was she went to school and the teacher said to her, you know what? You can't go out for recess because you're not wearing enough clothes. Okay? The next day she came in more clothes. She came back. That night I was still cold. So it took 3 days. She was wearing completely appropriate for her, the winter coat, the gloves, the hat, the boots. It took 3 days. She did it all on her own, right? So it was the mother being able to step back and realize, just what you're saying. Why do I have to get involved with this? Why does this have to be an argument and threats and force between us? She was amazed. I mean, these kinds of stories happen all the time. Whereas, again, parents would think, what do you mean let her go out without a coat? That's irresponsible.
Yeah, and what the parents don't really see here is that, okay, so this process of learning takes 3 days. If you force the issue, you could be stuck forcing the issue for 3 years. Right? Whereas once a child knows, well, this is really going to negatively impact me if I don't wear a coat in cold weather, well, that issue is taken care of pretty much for the rest of their life.
That's right. And the other thing is to realize you are not your child. So your child may go out with that sweater and feel fine, right? I mean, I live where it gets cold. There are people who are bundled up from 50 degrees in a down coat, and there are people, it's snowing, and they're wearing shorts. It works for them. Do I have to be the arbiter of, how everything is for the other person? It's that I'm cold, so go put on a sweater. It's like, you have autonomy. You can figure it out for yourself. And how much, and I think this was also mentioned in the podcast, when I keep giving you the solutions, I keep giving you a vote of no confidence.
Right. That
you won't be able to figure it out. I want my kids to grow up knowing that they have the ability to figure things out. And if they don't have the answer, they can ask for help, but that they are self-reliant and they are self-confident. And how do you become that way? In part by making your own decisions and seeing how they fall out.
Yeah, we just yesterday recorded a podcast with Pete Gerlach, and Pete was saying in there, one of the most important things you can give to your child, one of the most important gifts, is the gift of self-esteem, or creating an environment where they're going to have self-esteem. Because I guess you can't really give self-esteem to somebody, but you know what I mean. But you can definitely create the environment for that. And so that's what you're doing by saying, you know what, I trust you to make good decisions.
That's right.
then they're
I trust you to make your own decision. If it's a good one, great. If it isn't, well, then you learned, right? So the first day going out with a sweater, maybe that wasn't the best decision, but it was the best decision that she made on that day, and that was fine. So she was cold. Okay.
right.
Still fine.
Right. And of course, this scenario right here fits into that top part of the behavior window you were talking about, which is ask yourself, if you're about to give advice or about to, you're still caught up in the old ways and you're thinking about issuing a demand or a commandment, ask yourself, okay, is this my problem or is this the child's problem? And if it's the child's problem, which in this case, it's the child's problem that they're going to be cold, most likely, if they go out in this weather underdressed. All right, it seems like I may have just lost somebody. Did I lose you? Are you there?
I'm here.
Okay. Skype was acting a little strange. All right, sorry. Anyway,
But
so this is a scenario where it's it's the child's problem. You can sit back and say, it's the child's problem. I'll let them solve it.
But let me say this. I want to fine-tune that a little bit in terms of PET. In this situation, the child does not have a problem, right? The child is fine going to school with a sweater. So in this situation, if I were to look and say whose problem it is it? If I were to ask that question, which I'm glad you're pointing out, that's the first question that I'm going to ask in every situation. And in time, you don't ask the question, it's automatic, right? But if I take a step back, the child doesn't have a problem. They want to go to school in a sweater. It's really my problem in the sense that I'm concerned that the child will be cold.
Yeah, I guess that's
right?
a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. That was a bad example on my part.
Maybe this will be a problem, maybe it won't, but right now, in essence, there's no problem. The child wants to wear a sweater. There's no problem. If you're in your house and the child's writing on the wall, and that's a wall that I have one person I know who painted an entire wall of their apartment in that black, like a blackboard, so that the kids can just write all over it. Whenever they feel like writing on the wall, they have chalk, they write all over the wall, right? Works for them. So if it's a situation where the child's writing on the wall, the child does not have a problem writing on the wall. They're having fun. I'm the one with the problem if I don't want it. It's interfering with me because it's interfering with what I want and what I need. So we're really looking at children and people moving through their lives the way they want to, right? They're not having a problem with what they're doing. If somebody is annoying me, what they're doing probably is not annoying them, or they wouldn't be doing it. If they're annoying me or I'm concerned, then I get to say my piece. I get to speak up in a respectful way and address it. So I don't want to belabor it. But in this situation, I don't think the child has a problem. If they do eventually, well, then we can help them solve their own problem, not give them the solution.
I want to inject a different example, because a lot of times, one of the biggest things we're interested about at Reboot Your Kids is not setting kids up to be adults who have disordered eating habits. And one of the biggest issues I think parents face is and you said with the coat issue about it's not, your child's body is not yours, right? They may go outside in a sweater and be comfortable. And I think that's a good segue into talking about food, that, we can't control the amount of food a child eats. One of the most popular authoritarian charges is clean your plate, right? You can't get up until you eat all your food, or a child will eat a certain amount and the parent will automatically come back with, you didn't eat enough. And this concept of we are not our child's body, that we need to trust them to eat the amount that is appropriate for their body. And they have to know when they're hungry and they have to know when they're full, and we can't step in and control that. So I think that's a good example of this isn't the child's problem, right? Eating a certain amount or eating a certain food or saying that they don't like X, Y, or Z food, that's actually our problem that we're imparting on the child, right? That we feel they're not eating enough, or we feel they're not eating the right variety.
That's right. That's right. And so here, if it becomes a health issue, right, then that's something else, right? If it becomes something where you end up in a doctor's office because of an eating pattern, well, then you're going to address it in a different way. But on a everyday basis, I mean, again, would you say to a guest in your house or your spouse, you need to eat more, or you have to have more peas, or you didn't eat enough of this, and because you didn't clean your plate, you can't have dessert? I mean, we would never do anything like that. So I think your point is very well taken that children are self-regulating. They know. I mean, if you observe your children, sometimes they're super hungry, they're going to be eating a lot. Sometimes they don't want to eat at all, they're not that hungry. I mean, it can go in waves. Some children eat a lot, their metabolism is a certain way. Others can subsist on what to us looks like very little. So I like the idea that you're saying that children should be autonomous about their body unless there's a real problem.
Right. Now, I wanted to go in and go back and bring some more focus to that, where there's a situation where it's the child's problem, because I think this is something that is very important. It comes up often, and Thomas Gordon totally nailed it, and you don't see it talked about nearly as much. Most of what you hear about in parenting, you know, when you're looking at self-help books or podcasts or things like that, is when the adult has the problem. But
right.
this focus on, and let me give a better example. So this is your child comes home, maybe they were at the playground, or and they say, you know what, my friend Johnny, he we were playing with this toy, and I wanted to play with it, and you know, and he didn't let me have it. Or maybe it's a sibling, something that you know, siblings doing this sort of thing is something where the parent would very often hop right in there. You know, my brother wouldn't let me have the toy, and I wanted it. He's hogging it. You ask yourself there, is this my problem or is it the child's problem? Most parents are going to hop in there and start solving that problem for the child. But I think Thomas Gordon would look at that and say, you know, this is the child's problem. I don't have to hop in there. Now, if the child asks me for help, then you can maybe offer guidance to help them how, you know, find ways to solve this problem. But you don't necessarily have to do that. I mean, in fact, you shouldn't step in and just start solving the problem for them. Could you maybe talk about that a little bit?
Yes. And I think it's a wonderful point, because what I want to say at the before I get into it is, although it's a different approach, but it can be a tremendous relief to parents to realize they don't have to have all the answers and they don't have to solve their children's problems. And if you, going back to the behavior window that we looked at, and we made it into three parts, right? Child's problem, no problem, parent problem. There's a line, sort of a bold line that goes through the window saying that we need to come to accept and believe that it's okay for a child to have a problem, right? That has to be acceptable that children have problems. So that's a piece also that is often a different concept for parents to think about, because everybody has problems. Even an infant has problems. They cry. So you want to try to help them solve those problems, but you want it to be acceptable that they have problems. You don't want to run interference so that they never have a problem. I think that robs them of the opportunity to solve, just, have these experiences. And you don't want to solve the problems for them. Again, you're giving a vote of no confidence. So in a situation where the child comes in and says, I was at the playground and Johnny took my toy away and he wouldn't give it back and I was so upset. The skill set there is active and passive listening. So if the child's bringing a problem to me, I want to listen. And I want to indicate that I understand what they're saying to me. And that's basically it. I'm not, what Thomas Gordon calls them roadblocks. There are 12 roadblocks to communication when you're trying to help someone solve their own problem. Because you want to not have your own agenda, and you don't want to give solutions. You don't want to ask questions. You don't want to give advice. You just want to hear the other person and let them unfold and figure it out for themselves. And the way to do that is probably the most important skill you learn in the PET course, which is active listening, a way to feedback to the other person in your own words, and matching their emotionality, their emotional level, that to give an understanding that you really understand what they're saying, right? So if that kid said, I'm so upset, he's like, oh, you really didn't like it that he took your toy. No, and then he went over there, and oh, all right. So you give a combination of active and passive listening. Sometimes, as we all know, as adults, venting is all you need, and that's that. Sometimes there's more to it, and there are a lot of examples in the Parent Effectiveness Training book, as well as the workbook that comes with the course, that show how just that kind of listening unfolds whatever the real issue may be that the person may not even know at the time. There's one example that's given where a child comes in saying, I hate school, and it goes from I hate school to, well, I don't really hate school, but I hate this one teacher. Well, I don't really hate this one teacher. And it ends up with, and this was a true transcript of a conversation that went on between parent and child, with the girl really upset because she's not that popular and she doesn't know how to make friends. So the active listening process can often take you and help the person get to layers that they're not even aware of at the outset, right? And if you stop it in its tracks, I hate school, right? And you give a roadblock response, don't say that. You have to go to school and everybody goes to school, so you better get used to it. Well, you've just short-circuited that whole process of finding out what really is troubling this person, right? So when the other person has the problem, when the child has a problem, I definitely don't want to solve it. If I have, if it's between siblings, what I often say is, as long as there's no fear of the emergency room, let them work it out. And if they come to you, you say, this is between you and Jane. Work it out, right? If they're too little, then you're going to help them to work it out. You're sort of going to be their mediator so they learn how to do that. But I know that I have a couple right now where they now hear the kids say to each other, I'm going to tell mom. Oh, you know what she's going to say. She's just going to tell us to work it out. All right, let's work it out. So you have a learning process there, but I don't want to get involved if it's not my problem. And I agree with you that a lot of times parents have been trained or observed or have been brought up this way where the parents solve the problems. You have people in their 20s and 30s who are still in 40s and 50s who are calling parents whenever there's a problem.
I'm wondering what the target age or starting age is for parent effectiveness training. I and my wife followed an approach called RIE for babies and infants, which basically extends this concept of mutual respect, et cetera, to basically it's when they are newborns. And one of the things is, and some of the things you mentioned promoted this in my mind, is making sure that like toddlers are allowed to figure out everything for themselves, where most parents are intent on doing everything for toddlers. It goes into detail as far as like, don't pick a child up without telling them you're going to pick them up. Like, they're just not objects that we can just move around the room. Like, we should respectfully say, I'm going to pick you up now. Or when the child is able to respond, even if they're able to respond with a whine or whatever, you're asking them, can I pick you up? And so it extends respect as far as that goes. And then as they get older, when they're having conflicts, like taking toys from other toddlers' hands, which a lot of parents would label that as, we're talking about an 8-month-old here, and a parent's already thinking, oh my gosh, my child is mean. Look at them stealing from everybody else. And it's just a natural thing that any 8-month-old would do or 1.5-year-old would do. And we have to let the kids work it out, even at that age. The parent can't be stepping in, being the police officer for all of these interactions. That it's just let the kids interact and be kids and let them work it out. So I'm wondering, at what age is parent effectiveness training? Because there's a lot of communication involved here, right? And I think RIE is very great with babies and toddlers, where because the baby or the child can't communicate yet, the parent is extending even more respect probably. And there's a technique called sportscasting where the parent will sportscast what's actually happening because the child isn't able to communicate yet. So if a baby comes up and takes a toy out of another baby's hand, the parent is right there saying, Johnny had the toy and now Sarah has it. And if one baby looks sad because the toy was taken, the parent is kind of sportscasting that, saying, Johnny looks very sad that Sarah took the toy. And it kind of just is helping the child learn to, one, identify what they're feeling, and then two, communicate it eventually without saying, hey, you stole that, give it back to me, and yelling and all this other stuff. It's kind of just modeling effective communication.
I love what you're saying, and let me start out by answering your question. Parent effectiveness training can start from birth because we're talking to each other, but a lot of it is nonverbal communication when kids are little. And I like sportscasting. The term I use is narrating, so that I'm the narrator to their experience when they don't have the words. Right, so I think they're basically the same. So if you see an interaction, unless there's going to be genuine harm done, right? Again, I use my exaggeration of emergency room needed. I'm not going to interfere, right? But I like the idea of the sports casting and narrating. Like you grab that from John, and look, now he's upset and crying. Right? And then if John's crying, you could say, John, you look like you didn't like that Tom took that away from you. Right? So I'm going to be there sort of helping them to understand when they don't have the words to do it. And I like the idea of being very respectful to an infant, right? And the narration. I mean, it's also very good for their verbal skills as well. But, oh, you're crying. I'm going to pick you up and see if that will help you. Right? So that's one way.
Right.
Or, right, because if you're going to ask them, can I pick you up, they're not going to be able to answer you. But so you can give your, let me look in your diaper and see if you're wet, and maybe that's what's bothering you. Oh, you have a wet diaper. Let me change that for you. Maybe you'll feel more comfortable. Right? So I like the idea of being respectful and communicating. And there are ways, nonverbal ways to communicate, also in a respectful way. So this skill set is, I think, beneficial. Actually, I think it's beneficial to everyone in the world, not just parents and children.
Absolutely.
I think that's why Dr. Gordon was nominated twice for the Peace Prize, because if everyone would treat each other with this kind of respect and have open, honest, direct communication, we'd have a very different world. That's another topic. But I think that using this from the beginning and learning these skills and the skills you're talking about only will stand you in good stead, because this is now what you're modeling, and this is the environment that your child is being raised in. Just like if you raise them in an environment with healthy food as opposed to an environment with, fast food and snack foods, and you're going to have a different result, right? So I think right from the beginning, you're creating an environment that is going to promote the healthy growth of these children.
So one area where I know parents are probably really interested to hear more about, especially the older their children are, is no-lose conflict resolution. Can you explain, or do you have any great examples of how this actually looks in real life?
Yeah. So no lose, we have basically our society is set up, I win, you lose, or you win, I lose. So Dr. Gordon is saying, can we have win-win, where both people win? And there's also a piece that I'm going to insert here about compromise, which says that it's not always the best way to go. Because very often when both people compromise, both people are unhappy. So I'm just putting that in there as a thought to consider, that it's not, people say, well, we have to compromise. I don't want I don't want people to compromise unless they really are okay with it. If they're unhappy with it, then that's not such a good solution. So if, let me think of, let me say this. So it's the 6-step problem solving seems very much like the kind of problem solving that you hear all over in terms of, you identify the issue and then you brainstorm solutions and then you choose among the solutions and then you have a plan to implement and you have follow-up, and it's something that most people are familiar with. The key difference in PET is the very first step, which in the traditional problem solving, the way it's phrased is identify the problem, right? What's the problem? But with Dr. Gordon's method, it's identify the need. And that's where there's a crucial difference. So if someone says the problem is, here's the good example that's a true case in point. Okay, so now you're with teenagers and you're home, and the kid comes in and says, or let's make it a couple. It doesn't matter. The kid says, "I need the car tonight," and the parent says, "No, I need the car," and the kid says, "Well, but I have to have the car," and the parent says, "Look, you had the car the last 2 nights. I need the car tonight. End of story. That's it. It's not fair. I have to have the car, and you'll just have to figure it out." And the kid goes slumping off to their room. Okay. Now we revisit and we say, okay, a car is a solution. What is the real need? So you redo it and you say, "I need the car tonight." "Oh, me too. So what do you need to do?" "Oh, well, I have to go to the library by 5:30 and return these books." "Oh, well, actually, I have to go over to Grandma at 9 o'clock. So what time will you be back?" "Oh, I'll be back before 7. "Oh, there's no problem." Okay, so right there, just by communicating what you really need, the problem disappears. This is real life situation here. This is the kind of thing that people go through. They just dig in their heels because I have to win and I have to get it because otherwise I'm not going to get what I need. So identifying the need versus identifying the problem is a different way of approaching it. And when you identified what you really need, then you have a whole different way of coming to the solutions. Very often what we'll say in the course is, if you get to the very end and every possible solution that you came up with in your brainstorming got thrown out, you have to go back to identifying the need because you didn't get to the real need because none of the solutions are satisfying that real need.
Right. And I think I'll add in here that maybe there's even a pre-step is wanting to meet or help meet other people's needs, where a lot of times parents won't do this negotiation process or this problem-solving process because they don't want to give up any ground for their own if they're going to lose any part of the benefit, or if they're going to have to expend any additional time and energy, they just resort to, "Oh, I'd rather not help meet this other person's needs," where you wouldn't do that with a colleague or an adult friend, right? So this is another example of not extending respect to a child, where, "Oh, you're just a child, therefore you don't deserve the same respect I would extend to somebody else," where if this was my best friend, I would certainly negotiate with them and I would certainly problem solve and find a win-win solution. But because you're a child, we're not going to go through that process. It's just going to be me benefiting and you not.
That's right. I think, again, my compassion toward parents is that they were not treated this way, right? They don't have this as their reference point. And they look at children differently than they do other people, right? A lot of parents, they don't even realize, right? This is just the way you do it, right? They don't know there's a better way or a different way. So there's that piece. And there's also the piece of our society, which is win-lose, right? We don't have that. I don't think it's ingrained in us win-win as a concept, that I can enter this thinking that we both can get our needs met. right? So if I start out by knowing that unless I put my foot down, I'm going to be trampled upon, and that's going to my approach is going to be very different, right? And again, as you said, as you rightfully point out, the concept of I don't have the time for this, right? And yet we have plenty of time to argue, because that arguing back and forth, please, or why not, or why can't, no, that amount of time, the same amount of time or possibly less would be spent if you negotiated it and you heard the other person out and you found out what really is going on and what the real need is. You know, the thing for transportation, there was another situation with a girl who wanted to do, I forget what it was, but it ended up like, well, there's a bicycle, there's a bus, you can call another person. Maybe we both need the car, but you know what? How about if I pay for you to take a cab there and I can use, because I need the car. I mean, there are so many different options.
Yeah.
Transportation is an easy one, but most situations, there are many more options, but we get stuck in, you know, my way because I don't want to lose.
That's a huge issue with parents and kids, but also with adult to adult, that we often get stuck in this black and white paradigm of, you know, we're focused on who's going to get the car.
That's
and
right.
So we're assuming that it's either he gets the car or I get the car. That's the only way to solve this problem. And looking
That's right.
outside of that false dichotomy shows that there's actually, you know, possibly half a dozen other ways where we could both win here. And parents have to understand that that happens so often when negotiating with kids as well. You can't get trapped into that either or fallacy. You have to really see, you know, let's lay out all of the options here where both of us could possibly win, not just focus on this one that we happen to be disagreeing over right now.
That's right. That's right.
Now, Judy, we've been talking a lot about conflicts of needs, but at the beginning of the interview, you had stated the process is slightly different when there's a conflict of values. Could you maybe talk about that for a minute?
Sure. And let me say that I realize it's noon, but I have more time, and I'm really enjoying this with both of you. So
we probably do want to cut it short pretty quickly here, but I did just want to get
okay.
Not so much because that we're not enjoying it either. This is a lot of fun, but more just
our listeners like us to minimize our episodes.
Yeah,
No
about an hour is about all that most people are wanting. So
okay, so let me give it to you. Let me say briefly, a conflict of values is when it's not really, doesn't really have any tangible effect on you, right? You're not going to lose your job, or you're not going to lose your home, or, you know, it's not interfering with you getting your needs met. You don't like it. So the approach goes from the one that's going to have the least harmful effect on the relationship to the one that's going to have the most. And of course, we all know what's going to have the most, and that's if you use power and force, right? So I can't, and the thing about that is the more power and force you use, the less influence you have. 100% power, 0 influence. So if I make you, and this is a controversial one, but I'm going to say it, if I make you go to church, I'm not going to be helping you to understand why it is that I feel going to church is important to me. I make you go, I can do that, and you will be there, right? And you will wear these clothes, and you will do all of that, and I can make you do that. But chances are I'm going to create someone who's going to be anti-church because I'm being forced. So that's the most detrimental to the relationship. The other way, briefly, is whenever you're thinking about values, the first thing is to examine your own value and to ask yourself, what is my value? Why do I have this value? Where did it come from? And do I want to keep it? So we're talking about, in the values area, you want some self-exploration. You want to know, before you're going to tell people, you want to know why it is that you hold this value and why it's important to you. So that's a process that's very important, I think, for everyone, especially parents, before they go after, they try to promote this value. Why do you think that, Mom? I don't know, I just do. Well, that doesn't hold much water. So I'm giving you the two opposites. In between, we have modeling, which of course is your the biggest way you impart your values is by modeling, right? I had the woman who was smoking who said, I don't want my child to smoke. And I keep telling him that. And he's picking up twigs. It's like a 4-year-old and smoking them. I said, forget it. You can't smoke and tell your child not to smoke. I mean, you could do that, but it's not going to work. So modeling is very big. And then I know I mentioned at the beginning the no problem area is a wonderful place where you can tell stories and talk about your values and why you have them and why you really like it when somebody calls you back right away, or why you like to hear from people, or why you like to help people, and why it feels good to you when somebody cares about you, and different stories from your life, right? Especially stories that put you in a bad light. Kids love that, how you learn from that. So there are less harmful and I don't want to even say less harmful. There are completely neutral ways, modeling and talking about your value. And then there's power, or the threat of power, which is really not going to have any influence on the person's value, but in the same way that you can make somebody, a child, do something, you can do that. And then one thing with PET that I think is really the greatest when it comes to values, I really love this piece, and I'll do it very briefly, is use a business model, okay? You ask the person if they want to hear what you have to say. You get hired as a consultant. You become an expert so that you know why you have the value. If it's something concrete, let's say like smoking, you can have, websites for the person to look at. You impart your information to them. And then the key is the last step, which is you then, just like in a business model, leave the responsibility for change with the other person. Right? Because a consultant wouldn't come into that person's business, give them the report, and then call next week and say, so did you move that office to the other side? And did you do this? And did you do that? No. You were hired as a consultant. You give your report. You step back. Your job is done. So not easy for parents, but this is really the best model in terms of influencing someone else's value in a neutral way. And I'm going to say that if you ask the person, listen, I want to talk to you about sunglasses because I notice you don't wear them and I really think they're important. Would you like to hear something that I found out? And the person says no. You say, okay. That's that. And I think that measure of respect is the same for adults in your life as well as children in the values area. So I'll stop there.
No, that's really fantastic because, I mean, you can force somebody to change their actions. You can use force to do that, but you can't force somebody to change their values.
That's right.
So, and yeah, I mean, human beings at their very nature, I think, are free and love freedom and crave freedom. And anytime you push something on them, they're going to push back.
Absolutely.
So if this is really what you want, in your example, you want them to go to church, by forcing them to do it, you're not actually getting them to adopt that value. But what you are doing is you're setting off that internal mechanism that says, hey, my freedom is being infringed upon, and they're going to push back with all their might. So
that's right.
Yeah,
you're creating the power struggle.
Right. Yeah, I like that how you said that. There's the inversely proportional power over someone, the power you use versus your influence. That's really, really good.
I usually use a schematic where you just make a rectangle and draw a line from one corner to another, making it 2 triangles, put power in one and influence in the other. And you'll see where power is the greatest, there's no influence. And when you want influence to be the greatest, there's no power.
All right, Judy. Well, you've been so gracious with your time. Before we let you go, could you let the listeners know the best way to get a hold of you and your work?
Sure. First of all of the parent effectiveness training is on the Gordon Training International website. You can go to gordontraining.com. I am listed there as an instructor in New York. You can always contact me directly. I have a website, villageparenting.com, where you can find information and contact me. And again, even with the Gordon Training website, they have podcasts, they have a blog, You can get a newsletter from them. You can familiarize yourself with the concepts more. And I hold individual training workshops all throughout the year in New York City. And I also travel. So if you have a group, I also can travel to where you are to give the workshop there. So I want to say this is my passion. I mean, I love doing this because I feel that when you help parents to be more comfortable and have better relationships with their children, it spreads out, right? Because now the children are learning these skills, and it really affects everyone in the world. So I feel so strongly about how helpful this can be, and I do my best to try to accommodate anybody who wants to learn the skills.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
It was my pleasure.
Thank you, Judy.
Take care.
Around the world, because I'm the wanderer. Yeah, I'm the wanderer. Roam around and round and round and round. Take it, Mark! From town to town, live life without a care. I'm as happy as a clown, with my 2 fists of iron, but I'm going nowhere. I'm the type of guy who never settles down. The pretty girls are, they know that I'm around. I kiss them and I love them, 'cause to me they're all the same. I hug them and I squeeze them. They don't even know my name. They call me the wanderer. Yeah, I'm the wanderer. I roam around and round and round and round. Yeah, I'm the wanderer. Yeah, I'm the wanderer. I roam around and round and round and round. One more time, 'cause I'm the wanderer.